Thanks everybody for joining us. Today's topic is the psychology of entrepreneurship. Joining Josh today is Tal Tsfany, the president and CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. Josh, over to you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Tal, for being here and joining all of us today. And also, thanks for everyone for joining and all of those who are maybe listening in live and later on. I just wanted to give a little bit of a sort of preface to how this talk came about. And I think it's important. A few weeks ago in the UK, there's a sort of political TV show on quite late at night called Question Time. And it's usually very sort of center of left guests discussing everything that's wrong with the West and all of this. And it's always sort of contrary to what the people think. And what happened is they brought on a guest called Luke Johnson. And Luke Johnson is quite a famous entrepreneur in the UK. And I noticed that not only was his thinking just so clear, rational, but I noticed how popular he was, particularly in elements of the press afterwards, on Twitter, and just sort of in general conversation, the things that he said. And so, I looked him up and I read his book, which I've got here, called Started Up. And just before, at the same time on HBL, Harry Binswanger's list, there was a post to an interview, a lost interview with Steve Jobs. And I watched this, and as soon as I watched it, I bought his official biography, and then I bought another biography. And I read them vigorously over like a couple of weeks. And I was very inspired by, always have been, but it's been very much on mind at the moment. And so that where I'm coming from today will be very Steve Jobs heavy. But what I wanted to do, and just before this talk this evening, I thought, why don't I just email Luke Johnson and ask him what it means to be an entrepreneur? And I thought, maybe he'll answer, maybe he won't. And I want to show you something. I asked him what it means to be an entrepreneur in a sentence or two. And he emailed me back this afternoon. And I was, really pleased to see that. And this is what he wrote. Entrepreneurs must be ambitious, optimistic, energetic, industrious, practical, motivated, and focused on action and results. They possess a sense of urgency and a hunger to achieve by working with others to satisfy customers and to generate a profit in doing so. And I'm going to post that to the chat so you can have that in text form. But I just thought what he had done is I've got all these notes here, and he just summed up the whole thing in a couple of sentences. He's basically got all my notes in 2 lines. And I was wondering, I thought that might be a good place to start, Tal, in terms of your relationship to what he's saying and your relationship to what it means to be an entrepreneur yourself and what it takes. And then I've got some thoughts and some things I've integrated from listening to and reading, particularly around Steve Jobs. And I thought maybe we could start there, if that seemed like a good idea.
Hey, Josh, great to meet you. No, this is great. This short paragraph that you got from him, I think, encapsulates a lot of my beliefs, my attitude toward what entrepreneurship means. Ayn Rand has this beautiful concept called sense of life.
Yeah. That
really describes your attitude toward life and what life is, And I always find myself an optimist, someone who sees the potential, what can be done. And we can talk a little bit about, profiles of people, because I invest a lot of time thinking about profiles from, when you're doing marketing, you have to think in profiling of individuals. So an entrepreneur for me is a specific profile that encapsulates, again, a lot of traits or a lot of the way they project themselves towards life. So I actually love what you just shared, because I think, again, it's surely coming from someone who has this attitude towards life. Yeah, yeah, and Steve Jobs for me is really an inspiration. He's like, you know, if you think about the power of fiction or Howard Rourke, knowing who Howard Rourke is in The Fountainhead and how they think about life, of what's possible, how uncompromising they are with their vision. Steve Jobs for me is like almost like a living proof that Howard Rourke can exist.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You know, I noticed that when even watching that lost interview, I was like, wow, this is like a chatty Howard Rourke. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, to follow on what you said, I've just got a quotation here from Steve Jobs' wife that I think backs up what you were saying about sense of life. And I just thought I'd read this out because it was very powerful for me. Slightly unintentional. He said that he, as well as being strong-minded and having a fully formed aesthetic, she said, he saw clearly what was not there, what could be there, and what had to be there. He imagined what reality lacked, and he set out to remedy it. He possessed an epic sense of possibility. No object was too small or insignificant to be exempt from Steve's examination of the meaning and quality of its form. He looked at things and then created things from the standpoint of perfection. And he did think big. He was the most unfettered thinker I've ever known. It was a deep pleasure and a lot of fun to think alongside him. And
Josh, have you heard the story about him selecting a couch for his living room?
well, in the book, I know that it took, I'm not sure if he even selected it in the end.
Yeah.
I know that.
He sat on the floor for about 7 years before he could determine what's the right one for him. But honestly, when I was running an organization in the Silicon Valley, I got to spend time with someone who was very close to Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And the personal stories you hear from their perspective is really even much more inspiring than what you read in the biographies. Just what it meant to work alongside someone who was uncompromising and as a visionaire, you know, the whole story. You have some of it in the biography about the creation of the iPhone and having one button for one thumb, right? But the guy that I interacted with lived it, and he said, you just need to understand what that meant. It's just that something is completely impossible, right? You just determined that something is, you spend months and months thinking about something and you say, it's not possible. There's no way in hell you can make that happen. And then you walk into a meeting with Steve Jobs and you come out, it's like, it's possible. Every time, over and over and over and over again. And actually, I've heard the same thing about Jeff Bezos. I have several friends who came up the ranks in Amazon, the guy who's, I won't say what he's doing there, but very up high there. And he said, look, let me give you an example of what it means to work with Jeff Bezos. He gives you a challenge. You work on that for 8 months, you and your entire team. You create a strategy, a plan, and we're talking about things that are deep science in the sense that we're talking about theories of constraints of what can be done in a warehouse and so on, how to make shipping more effective and cost effective. And it says you walk in, and the way you meet Jeff Bezos is that you don't speak. You write an abstract for up to 3 pages. We sit down for about 15, 30 minutes. We read the abstract. Everybody who is not part of the presenting team gets to put 3 notes they want to make, comments they want to make. That's it. Very short, limited to about a minute or 2. You go around the room and then you get to Jeff. And then Jeff says what he thinks, and that's when the discussion starts. So it's not like everybody gets to say whatever they think. There's a structure to it, a very scientific, methodological approach. But he said the most impressive thing is that we were working as a team for 8 months. And when we get to Jeff, he takes a marker, goes to the whiteboard, starts writing mathematical formulas to explain to us where our problem is in our thinking. It takes us about a month and a half to understand what he said, and then 6 months more to appreciate that he was right, and to find a solution with the direction that he gave us. So I think let's not underappreciate that it's not just the approach, it's the level of thinking, the level of integration that goes into solving problems that nobody else can see even the possibilities for. So it's way more than an attitude. Like Steve Jobs was very uncompromising. No, he was uncompromising because he had something much deeper, which is a vision and solutions in his head for things that other people didn't see possible. And if there's one thing I would start by just talking about what we can all take from this, it's just that the unboundedness of thinking, what is possible is unlimited. And every time I get presented with a problem, and usually the problem is presented with all its constraints, I try to listen to the problem and not the constraints, because the constraints in a way tries to kind of corner the problem in a specific domain where it's impossible to move it around because, oh, you can't move it right, you can't move it left, you can't move it forward. But you say, wait. If I drop all of this and look at it from a whole different angle, a different context, everything's possible. And more than anything, I think that philosophical thinking allows you to really do what people like Elon Musk say they do, but I don't think they fully do, which is to think in first principles. Drop all of the other things. I've heard Elon Musk talk about first principles. He's a pragmatic first principle guy. He thinks about first principles only in physics.
Yeah.
He doesn't think in first principles in philosophy, for instance. But going back to the entrepreneurial approach to life, more than anything, is just to see the possibilities. And I think deeper than that is the sense of life of a benevolent universe premise, which is the world is my playing ground. This is where I can express myself in unlimited ways.
100%.
I want to say one more thing,
Yeah.
just before I forget.
Sure.
First, what do you say about the color matching of my shirt and the background here? And just to make sure that everybody knows, I'm in my friend's kid's room. So Ariel is not my hero yet. The other thing I wanted to say about what Razi said, I don't think that we should use the word, nobody can cancel you. Nobody can cancel. Only you can cancel yourself. So turn on your camera and speak about what you believe and live your life. Don't think about cancellations of anyone.
Yeah. It was interesting because I actually had Elon Musk down here on my notes as a reference. The power of thinking for yourself is quite an article I read recently about his first principles thinking, only in physics though. That's the only area they focused on. But to go back to sense of life, which again has come up here when Tim Cook was talking about Steve Jobs, and I just want to read out what he said. This is something that he took from interacting with Steve Jobs, on a daily basis, is that simple can be harder than complex. This is what Steve was saying to Tim. And it ties into what you're saying about thinking. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean, is what Steve Jobs said, to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end, because once you get there, you can move mountains. And then talking about sense of life, Tim Cook said, I personally admire Steve Jobs, not for what he said, but for what he stood for. The largest lesson I learned from Steve was that the joy in life is in the journey. And I saw him live this every day. Steve never followed the herd. He thought deeply about almost everything and was the most unconventional thinker I've ever known. He always did what he thought was right, not what was easy. He never accepted the merely good. He would only accept great, insanely great. And I think that just ties in exactly what you were saying there, Tal. And, there's some questions that I wanted to ask you in relation to being a CEO, being an entrepreneur, given your background. The two questions I wanted to ask you was, what does it mean to be a strategic thinker? In that, because I know that's something that an entrepreneur has to be able to do, and that's something that Luke Johnson, who I've been in contact with, was saying that you have to be able to do. And also, you know, I have a small business on the side of, from me doing my day-to-day work as a counseling psychologist. And this is something that I think about if I was to ever get more successful in my other business, is what does it take to lead a big team of people? Because not only are you coming up with the ideas and managing that, but also, you know, I don't know how many people were working for work for Apple now, but it's something like 60,000, something like that. And I'm wondering what it takes psychologically and mentally to be responsible for a huge team of people. And I was wondering if you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question, strategic question.
Yeah.
At one point in my previous company I worked for that was serving AT&T, indirectly I managed a project of about 5,000 people. And I remember what it meant to think that you're, you know, going to work every day and you're directing about an army of 5,000 people working on a project. When I did a course in Harvard about strategic thinking, and the person there gave an analogy that goes with me. He says, there's the dance floor and there's the balcony. Think about it this way, right? So we're all dancing in the dance floor on a daily basis and we're doing what we're doing. But from time to time, if you take the time to just leave the dance floor and go to the balcony and just look at what's going on, you can see your point of view is completely different, right? And your job as a manager, as a leader, is to live more on the balcony alone, where it's lonely and maybe scary, right? Because you can see many more things than dancing on the dance floor, which is easy and fun. Might be a little rough, but you know, and for me, it's thinking versus doing, or thinking at a higher level versus thinking at a lower level. Yeah, going back to what you said, I want to connect it with being a deep thinker is the hardest thing in the world, and being a strategic thinker is the hardest thing in the world. And you develop an appreciation for why they pay managers so much is because they do the heavy lifting of thinking. They do what is the hardest thing in the world, which is to sit alone in your room or your office and think and analyze and integrate, which is much harder than moving boxes from one side of the room to the other side of the room. It's much, much harder, although one is sweating and the other one is doing this, right? So what does it take? It takes the capacity and the desire, because I don't think everyone should be an entrepreneur. I don't think anyone should open their own businesses and lead people. I don't think that's true. I think there's a segment of people in which this is what, they want to do. This is their passion, and they have the inclination to be more of thinkers rather than doers. Steve Jobs spent much more time thinking and analyzing than doing anything. I don't think that Steve Jobs, you know, since the day when he kind of work on motherboards in a garage, he didn't do much. He spent time learning, analyzing, thinking, envisioning, and so on. So it takes a lot of thinking. It takes you should have the capacity to deal with challenges that are very abstract. And I have to say, for me personally, it goes together with a lot of the need to deal with a lot of negative emotions that come with the responsibility of carrying that weight. I remember before I was exposed to objectivism at all, I had this tendency to get very anxious, because I had the tendency to blame myself on problems that evolved over time, that I didn't do enough, or I didn't think enough ahead of time. I didn't do enough planning. And I was working 20 hours a day. I'm lazy. I'm not thinking hard enough. I'm not thinking about all the angles. But when I learned the concept of really being grounded in reality and having the idea of objectivity and having full context, is where I realized how things really are. But the one thing you have to take with yourself is, is enjoyable for me to take the responsibility of being a leader with everything that goes with it. If something happens today with ARI, I'm responsible. No matter what happens, no matter if I didn't even know that it happened. Somebody calls and say, "Oh, you did this in your organization," I'm responsible. So carrying that weight, that strategic weight, is something you need to want to have. And I hear a lot of all kinds of self-help gurus like, yeah, create your own company and do. Why would you take the responsibility of strategic thinking, marketing that goes a lot with strategic thinking, and packaging your product and finding target audiences and working and managing people, the hardest thing in the world, to motivate people? You have to be a public speaker. You need to know what to say, how to think fast and think slow. Some people, it's like, this is too much. I just want to have my corner. I want to do my art or my reading or my therapy. Who said you need to be a business owner that runs 80 people if that's not what you really enjoy? A lot of people think they should be entrepreneurs because of some kind of duty. That this is in order to be cool, you have to be an entrepreneur. No, you shouldn't. Some people should manage themselves and nothing else. And yeah, so I don't know. There's a lot to say, and there's a lot to say about what you said in the beginning, which is about going from cleaning your thinking process. So you know how as a kid you look at a car and you say, oh, that car is a car. It's simple, it drives. And then you grow up and you look at the car, it's like, oh my God, it's so complicated. You open the hood, I don't know what's in there. It's so many moving parts, it's so complicated. Your head can explode if you just think about how to make a car. And then, but if you work in the car industry for about 20, 30 years and you learn everything as a an engineer, it becomes simple again, right? But it's educated simplicity or a sophisticated simplicity. So there's this book about architecture that says things go from simplicity, ignorant simplicity, to complexity, to informed simplicity. And in a way, as a strategic thinker, as you clarify your thought about everything, it goes from, oh, that's a simple problem, to, oh my God, it's a very complicated problem. And after you do a lot of thinking, it becomes simple again, but in a very, very deep way. So if you think about an iPhone, right? It looks simple. It's like, how come nobody thought about this before? But the amount of thinking that had to happen between, let's create a communication device that is easy to use and is all integrated, all the thinking that happens in the middle, to then being able to produce it and to market it, is the arc that you should appreciate as a strategic thinker of how the nature of problems. Yeah, that's I said a lot. I know there's a lot to dig into, but those are my thoughts.
I think it's really important to focus on the thinking, and I'd like to get to more sort of how people respond to entrepreneurs in a bit. But one thing that I really noticed from reading the Steve Jobs books was that when he returned to Apple, he had a sort of implicit understanding of the Crow epistemology. Because what he did is he said, no, we're slashing all the products into 4 categories. And within those 4 categories, we're going to have, again, only 4 categories, etc. He had an understanding of how much one can hold in mind at any one time. And that seemed to guide him throughout, the way that he just restructured everything. And I'm wondering if that's something you're relating to as something that's maybe universal amongst entrepreneurs, this ability to, I think you were kind of saying that about the iPhone there, that the deep thinking allowed more categorization and then integrating into simple units again. And it really struck me that I was like, wow, this is what he's saying and doing. He may not have read ITOAE or anything like that, but he definitely understood reality and how the mind worked at the same time and the connection between the two. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've noticed, or you noticed that you have to do in your day-to-day is break things down into simple, break things up and integrate them into simple units so you can hold them in mind.
The concept of focus with Steve Jobs is, I think, one of the most impressive things about him. Ruthless focus, I would call it. And when I evaluate myself against somebody like Steve Jobs, it's just that the approach is ruthless. It's like the approach of an average tennis player versus the ruthlessness of Roger Federer about the way he trains. Again, I don't know if I love tennis, so I study a little bit about Roger Federer and how he trains and what he does differently than to become the best. And I don't know if you saw the ESPN about Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same concept. It's the appreciation, and it's the same thing, but from a different angle. The amount of knowledge, the amount of thinking and integration that needs to happen is so vast about a narrow thing that you say, if I want to go that deep, there's no way I can do it that wide, right? So I need to just be thinking about this little problem of playing tennis or creating an iPhone or whatever it is that you want to do so deeply that I can't handle anything else. From a business perspective, this is a constant struggle. It's a daily struggle. I can share some of my my tactics on how to deal with that problem of being pulled to be wide while you continuously want to be deep. Because the deeper you are, the better your solution would be, the more long lasting it's going to be, the better you're going to be. You're going to create a better product than anything else. But you're constantly pulled by everyone around you to be wider and wider and wider and wider. And it's I can assure you he didn't read the ITOE because he was in a way a little bit of a mystic from that perspective, but Steve Jobs specifically, I mean, but he had this amazing sense of knowing that you can only do one thing. Now I will quote that person that I worked with that was close to Steve Jobs. And he said to me, he said something that really took me months to understand. He said there was a quote that they had in Apple, which is, and it sounds silly, there's no such thing as a small project. And so like, what do you mean there's no such thing as a small project? It's like, there's no such thing as a small project. Now, if you really understand what that means, it means that all of those things that people tell you, oh, let's do this thing. Take an action item. So what do you mean take an action item? What goes into doing this thing? It's a little thing, just, do it. But if you really understand what goes into selecting the color of the floor in an Apple store, you understand it's not a simple project. There's a lot of things that need to go into it. Now, Steve Jobs had this attitude of there's no such thing as a small project. Now, you can make things work in parallel, meaning you can create a team that will work on the right color of the floor of the future Apple store that he had in mind, that will be part of the bigger architecture team of what kind of experience we want to create for someone who walks into an Apple store. That's a good way to still appreciate the Crow epistemology and the focus that you want to have, but in an economy of scale, in scale, right? But you slice and dice it in a way where you guys are responsible for the color of the floor and the quality of the floor of the Apple store. It better be good, okay? So that's how you manage in scale, by not mingling everything together. Like, let's create a big committee that will work on the Apple store. No, you create 18 different task teams who are responsible for one small aspect of the Apple store, with a vision and a brief that Steve Jobs himself writes about the experience that he wants to create. And that's how you still maintain the focus and the quality, together with the vast scope of the things you need to be doing. And that is very powerful. Understanding as a startup that there's no such thing as a small project will make you say no to 95% of the things people ask you to do. It's like, we're not doing this now, and we're not doing this because you think it's a great idea. We're not doing that because our customer thinks it's a great idea. We're not doing 10 other things. This is why I need to slow down on a daily basis. I tend to rush. I know that about myself because I'm very creative. So I love to see things, at least as a pilot, to see, will they work or not? But I have to remind myself, and so I hire people around me that remind me, that are really good with that, to slow down. Do we really want to do this? Because you know what will the price will be of doing this. This thing you wanted to do is this deep, will now be this deep because we have to go and do another thing with limited resources. So and I think if you think about what comes before focus is vision. In order to have focus, you have to really know what it is that you want, and more than anything, what you don't want. And that, when we talk about introspection, that's the tool that allows you to put down on paper what it is that you want, how will that manifest itself in reality, and be able to close your eyes and say, I'm living the reality that I want to create. And suddenly, if you spend 15 minutes living in that reality, you will appreciate the complexity of things that need to happen in order for you to get there. And I'm just talking about you, not a company. Where I want to be in 5 years from now. Try to do that exercise of introspecting a world in 5 years where you live. Close your eyes and imagine it for 15 minutes, and then make a list of all the things that you see around you and all the things that need to happen in order for you to live in that reality. And see how complicated that is. So if you have a clear vision, which is exactly what Steve Jobs had an amazing capacity to have. He saw the iPhone 10 years before the iPhone was there, right? He saw it. And having that capability to visualize, that's why it's called vision, is a superpower. And people don't spend enough time. They rush to solution. They rush to start building something without having the time, putting the time to think about the vision and what they want to create.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a list here of what I thought were some of the traits and, it's crucial to be an entrepreneur. And I've got written down here, clear goals, just clear, very simple, clear, overarching goals, and everything serves that long-term goal. I also wrote down, that independent thinking, they have to have, and I'm sure this is quite self-obvious with this audience, but very strong, high self-esteem. They have to be selfish. I've worked with quite a few people who have been very successful and then cut their own feet off. They've never quite got to the top, and they are struck down with issues of self-esteem, particularly as many of you know, self-esteem asks two questions of you. Am I able? And am I worthy? And I usually find that the people who chop their own feet off are struggling with, am I worthy? They have that area of their life is very messy. And I've noticed that entrepreneurs have that. They have the confidence in their ability, but they also believe they have a self-worth, and they often know what it is they're going for and what they want is worthy to them. And they're confident in that self-worth. They have resilience and optimism. I think you mentioned both those traits earlier. And they're ambitious. And but the other thing that I thought maybe we could move to, and then we could sort of open it up to questions, etc., was something that I really have noticed, particularly in the United States, even amongst all the madness going on right now, and in the UK, is that the sort of general public really do still revere entrepreneurs. They have this, they're very split. There's sort of the greedy anonymous banker type they don't like, but the sort of individualist entrepreneur who's famous, that people are very, very in general very warm towards and admire. And in the UK, the one of the sort of most loved entrepreneurs is someone called James Dyson, who invented a lot of the hand dryers and vacuum cleaners and things, and he's the richest man in the UK, and he is constantly comes up as a sort of an inspirational figure, referenced all the time. And then you have people like Richard Branson in the past. People used to say the same thing. And I know that one thing that Richard Branson did that I learned, very simple, is because he again had a sort of has an implicit understanding of the epistemology, he would write down lists of things to do because he knew he couldn't hold all these things in mind. And I remember he just said, I write down lists and I spend the day crossing off the lists. But what I wanted to get at is on an implicit level, people still really respond to, and I think it comes back to what you said at the beginning, the sense of life of the entrepreneur is what people, they see entrepreneurs, they seem to be having fun. They seem to love what they do. Their life has meaning and purpose. And so many people's lives don't have meaning and purpose. Yet the entrepreneur is one of the very people in business who inspires the general public in the same way that sportsmen do. And then, you know, your Michael Jordans, etc. That documentary that came out on Michael Jordan, that I have no interest in basketball whatsoever. I loved that show. Absolutely loved it, because I loved watching someone who just loved what they're doing so much and did it so well. And I think that's what comes across as well is you know, these great men inspire, and they still continue to inspire. And I've thought maybe if you have some thoughts on that, and also I know there's a tragedy that in that too, because so many entrepreneurs are funding the very people who want to destroy them.
So first, to the varying entrepreneurs, I think if you see the beauty of it is, so I went to several tennis Grand Slams to watch Roger Federer play, and the amount of love that is expressed to someone like a Roger Federer is just amazing to me, to see all the way from 80-year-olds to 5-year-olds just waiting just to get a glance of that, of the masterhood of, you know, the level of playing, of genius, and then the way they think, what they think of him, just being able to shake his hand or have him sign your hat, or where does that come from, right? It comes from a very deep sense of everybody knowing that this is what they want out of life. They want to find a Roger Federer or Michael Jordan in them, or a Steve Jobs in them. Those people found something or understood something about the way to live life that most people don't. And when Ayn Rand talks about she can imagine a generation or an era of geniuses. If kids were taught to think like, I am the hero of my life, you know, the world is my playground, you can do whatever you want, everything is open and possible to you, you would see thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of geniuses out there expressing themselves without anything holding them back, which I think you're right. Specifically asking themselves, am I able? As if anyone is unable to want something, right? If you think about it as just take a perfect world, for instance. What are the possibilities that a baby, if you train them the right way, would not end up wanting something and then being able to achieve it, right? If they put their mind to it. And then worthy, where does that come from? And then you're talking about the world of philosophies that basically cripple you to even think that you are able to achieve or are worthy to achieve. As you're right, those are two very fundamental questions. So from one hand, you see the potential when you see a line of people waiting to shake a tennis player's hand, right? So think about it. What does the guy do? He holds a racket and he hits it over the net. But that's not what it is. The thing that attracts them to him is that he got something and I want the same for my life. That's what the fans want. So the same goes for, I think, Dyson and all the other entrepreneurs. And you have to live in a world where you're selfish and you understand that your life is the standard of value. I always remind myself, and I tell my kids, and I remind them because it kind of hits you in the face. The world will end when you die. The world will end when you die. There's going to be no world anymore. When Ayn Rand said that in an interview, I was like, you know, I was blown away by that statement. It captures everything about the way you should think about your life. It's like an hourglass, and you're racing against time, and the world is going to end. And that's how you should treat your life. And you know, you can take it in so many directions, but it's all one big thing, which is I have limited time. Life is about expressing the potential that me as a human can express in life, in what is given me as my method of expressing myself. I'm not a squirrel, and I'm not a tiger, and I'm not an ant. I'm a human being. So to thrive as a human being, what does that mean? Which I actually think it's so rare to have geniuses and mega entrepreneurs, because they have almost to stumble on the right philosophy for life, right? If you think about the Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, those are very few. But why can't we teach everyone to think about life this way? And for me, that is why you need the right philosophy. It's like a foundation. If you think about Steve Jobs and the way he thinks about life, it's very close to the foundation of the objectivist view of morality, right? The same with now they have a lot of weird ideas attached to it, but at the core, they're individualists, they're selfish, they have high self-esteem, they're all about productivity, they're honest, they're rational. Take all the virtues, they have them implicitly. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And just as a sort of sidetrack thing, I read a book, or I read about half of it a few years ago. Actually, someone on an objectivist panel at one of the Ocons had mentioned it. It's called Givers and Takers by Adam Grant. And Adam Grant's it's pretty populist sort of business psychologist, I believe. And he said that, and I'm curious because I don't have any actual experience of this, but it struck me is, well, one thing that he debunked is that most entrepreneurs are these sort of, in the more traditional, inconsiderate style, selfish behavior types. He said he spent his time interviewing most of the sort of top CEOs in Silicon Valley, and he actually, found that they're actually really nice people, not evil, out sort of psychopaths. But the other thing that struck me from the book is that he said that entrepreneurs are amazing networkers, as in not networkers in terms of they go to cocktail parties and try and get in with the latest cool people or anything like that, but they're amazing at getting the right people with the right people. And that's what they do. And they find that process in itself highly rewarding. So they're not, because their esteem is so high, they're not worried about linking people up and them running off with a better iPhone idea or a better this, that, the other, that they have this very strong sense of great teams. I think Steve Jobs called them just, type or class A workers and allowing them, but how Adam Grant was struck by how willing they were to, in a meeting, call someone up and say, hey, Tal, you must speak with Lee about introspection, and Razi, you must speak with Nikos about working in Europe, and Joseph, you must speak to Harry Binswanger about this, and so, and so on. And just the love of doing that, it was something that he identified as one of the most crucial elements of the entrepreneur. And I wonder if that's something you noticed.
Yeah, it's one of the things I enjoy there's a couple of things here. First, as an entrepreneur and someone who loves life so much, you expect to see that with other people. So in a way, it's so enjoyable to see that in other people. And it's so frustrating to see people that don't have it. And when you said, they're nice people, I would add nice to whom? And if they're considerate to whom? Usually they're very nice and very considerate to people who present value to them. And they're very inconsiderate and not so nice to people who present no value. Try to hear stories of people that were laid off from Apple after Steve Jobs spent 5 minutes with them and said, you're fired. Why? Because I take your things, get out of here, right? And that's how Steve Jobs fired people. But he could spend days with Johnny Ive talking about a shape or an angle or something in the product, right? Um, I take the way I love to do things is just you see potential in people, and sometimes it's frustrating that they don't see the potential in themselves, and so you have to kick them a little bit to say, you have that potential, now here's what you do with it, and go talk to that person, because it's like I want the best for you. And if you see in Ayn Rand's fiction, the almost love relationships between entrepreneurs, right? Between Reardon and D'Anconia and Francisco, people that just create those amazing bonds because they're like partners, or they're just like, how would I say, they're taking a ride together. And it's so powerful to surround yourself with people that are like that. And again, let me say something about selfishness. In my mind, if you truly understand being self-interested or selfish, that means that the words nice, considerate, philanthropic, are package deals in a way from that perspective. It's like, if my life is the standard of value, my happiness is the standard of value, why would anyone expect me to be nice to everyone? Why is that a virtue? Being nice. Being patient. Why is that a virtue? Well, it's a virtue if you identify that Josh is a great guy and I'm going to spend an hour and a half talking to you, and I'll be very patient. I'll listen to what you have to say because I find it very valuable. But if there's somebody in the street who shouts something, why should I be patient? Why should I listen? Why should I spend the time with it? So all of those things that are coming again from this background of what is right and how you should behave, because society is telling you, rethink everything. Rethink nice, rethink considerate, rethink patient, rethink all of those things that people expect you to be, and redefine them. I'm nice to people that I want to be nice to. I'm very considerate, and I'm very I'm very lenient with the time I invest in people that I think are worth my investment. I won't take a meeting with some people who ask meetings for me for my time. No, why should I spend my time with them? But if they present a value to me, yeah, let's take a couple of hours and think things through. And so take some of the things you said. I would just caution people to stop for a second and really understand what the meaning of protecting your time, protecting your passions, what does that mean? And I am the nicest person to some people, and I don't want to even hear what other people that I deal with think about me. Mainly people that I've let go in my business, people that I told them, you're not good for this job, go do something else. And people that fought with me and tried to jeopardize my principles in my company. And there are many horror stories about what it takes to protect your principles. So yeah, there's there's a lot there.
Okay, so what I was thinking is I'd like to just read out one paragraph from this book by Luke Johnson, and then I thought we could open it up to some questions. And I can already see there's some questions in the chat, but I just thought this is what got me to read the rest of the book. Whereas he said, I think entrepreneurs are the unsung heroes of our time. They generate the jobs and taxes that keep our society civilized. They risk going broke, or maybe just working 100 hours a week and earning very little. They battle through recessions, regulation, and competition to satisfy our wants. I salute their efforts, ingenuity, and commitment. This book is dedicated to them, because without dynamism and bold thinking, we'd all be immeasurably poorer. I hope one or two of these chapters help motivate and provide a little guidance to the warrior entrepreneurs of our time. And for someone who's not an objectivist, I thought that was a pretty good opening last paragraph of a preface to a book I've enjoyed.
It's very powerful, and I don't think those people should be objectivist or even bother, occupy themselves with thinking about am I an objectivist or not. I want to say something before we open it up. Most people should not be philosophers, not even think about philosophy, hopefully not even study directly, only implicitly. I think that the majority of people walking this earth are interested in living life without being a physicist. They either want to be engineers who build things, or they want to be business people who create wealth, but not all of us need to be physicists. By that, I mean, I've read everything Ayn Rand and everything nonfiction and even beyond that, and listened to all of Leonard Peikoff's courses. This is because I am personally interested in the physics of philosophy. What is free will, and what is the nature of consciousness? What is the right epistemology? When I talk to our major donors, for instance, in ARI, they're not interested in that. They said, look, I've read Atlas. It is exactly the way I want the world to look like. I know you guys are doing this. This is why I'm giving you money, but I'm not interested in going deeper. I want to go build my business. And they don't even bother themselves with the questions. Am I an objectivist? What is objectivist? And that is how the world should look like. You should go out, live your life. And if you are stuck, right? The same as people come to you, Josh, for some counsel of, I have a psychological problem. I cannot. A lot of problems are philosophical problems, moral problems. And we don't have clinics of philosophers, right? Why don't we? Right? Why can't I go consult with a philosopher to say, look, I have this issue of I want to be nice all the time. I want to please people, right? Is that a psychological problem? Maybe it's a philosophical problem. Maybe you have a moral premise, right? And you can talk about the intersection of philosophy and psychology. It's a really interesting question that I asked a lot of questions about, at least our philosophers, what they think is where does philosophy end and psychology starts? But again, I want to just stress that the fact that we are all here is because of our love of philosophy, but there's a distortion field here, right? Most people should not be in Zoom meetings talking about philosophy. They should be talking in Zoom meetings, talks about organized around what they want to do, right? The passions, the expertise they need to accumulate in order to do something amazing. Anyway, that just wanted to say that. So, because a lot of times people are telling me, yeah, in a perfect world, everybody will read ITOE. It's like, no, not in my perfect world.
Okay, great. So I think we'll open it up to questions now.
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat and a few hands raised. So if you already have your hand raised, we will probably get to you. If you have a question and don't have your hand raised, do it now and we might get to you. The first hand that was raised, you guys can't see it, but I saw it. So, and this is somebody who has read ITOE, I think, right? Yeah. George, first question.
Yes. So my question is with regards to the difficulty of being a CEO or an entrepreneur in terms of developing the expertise that you need to understand everything that goes on in the business. So when you manage a lot of people, it's not just the size of the team that you manage, but the different fields, right? You will have people in IT, accountants, legal experts, you will have marketing, HR. All of these people come to you as a CEO with problems, or they come to you with reports, they come to you with information. Now you need to make sense of it in order to steer the business in the direction you want to take it, according to your vision. But each one of those experts understands their field so deeply, they have their own jargon, that it seems to me that it's very daunting. It's like a really, really, really difficult task to be an expert in every single one of those fields. So what I wanted to ask Tal is, when he when he encounters information from all those teams that he has managed, from all teams of experts, does he actually go back and study those fields to the level that he is comfortable, he understands exactly the crux of each problem that he's trying to solve or help solve? Or does he place a great deal of faith in the people that he has hired? Where is that balance? How does he find that balance?
So I would say, in order to answer your question, you have to take 2 steps back. What you're trying to do when you're running a business is to achieve a specific goal, right? If you have a very clear vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve, you understand the complexity of what needs to happen in order for you to fulfill that vision. And you understand that in order to fulfill that vision, there has to be a division of labor between accountants and product managers and research and development and so on and so on and so on, right? All of the different departments, marketing. And if you have a clear vision, then you understand how the different pieces of the puzzles are going to come together in order to create that vision. And as you start kind of executing on your vision, you start hiring people, someone to do your accounting, someone to be your product manager, somebody to go execute on your vision for the product, designer, right? Someone who writes the content, whatever that is. You always keep in mind, thinking about being on the balcony, how does the puzzle work? You know that every person is filling a piece of the puzzle, and some pieces of the puzzles are that big, the person, let's say, who's building your product, and the accounting team is a little smaller piece. I find that whenever I'm passionate about doing something, I can easily memorize everything about everything. What is the cash flow right now with ARI? What are we doing? Who's responsible for what? Why? Because I'm passionate about it. I did a job before ARI. I made a mistake, and between jobs, I sold a company and we sold the company, and then I took another job, and it paid really, really well, so I took it, but I was not really passionate about it. And it amazed me that every morning I would wake up, it's like, what happened yesterday? I couldn't remember what we agreed we're going to do. And I was like, what's going on? Am I getting old? And everything is, I just forget everything. And after I did a lot of research, I just don't care about it. I don't care about the product. I don't care about the market. I don't care about if we succeed or not, honestly. Why am I doing this? And money is not a good reason. So I quit. So first, be passionate, have a clear vision. And to the question about should you be an expert? No, don't be an expert, but know enough to understand how those pieces come together. Now, I don't know enough about accounting, but I know very well what cash flow means right now. And I know exactly what comes out of the financial system. And I actually take it and kind of mesh it to talk my own language, the numbers that I understand. But it goes back to the point where Josh and I talked about, which is identifying talent. So what I do is I find people that work with me that understand what I'm talking about and understand my vision, and they understand the principles of what we're trying to implement. And then over time, doesn't take you a lot of time to identify if you trust their judgment or not. So you give them clear guidance and you trust their you see what they're coming back with. And if you see that they're going in the right direction, you give them more and more leeway, because it's like, you're the expert, not me. I don't know how you do what you do, but I like the result. So go and do more of this. Or no, this is completely wrong. You're not thinking about this right. And if they don't cut it, they don't cut it. You move to the next person. So don't confuse you. Don't get stuck with thinking you should know much more than you know. I think it's a mistake to be a mega entrepreneur at 22 or 24. You should try to do things at that age. And there's not a lot of people like Mark Zuckerberg. I think what Steve Jobs went through, what Jeff Bezos went through in order to gain more knowledge about what business is and how it functions and how you function in that environment, and then have a vision on what you want to create is the right way to go. But don't think that it's an impossible task to know everything about all of the aspects of running a business. You have a team and there's a clear division of labor.
Well, I'm not going to ask George if he has a follow-up because I know he does, as do I, but we have a few questions in the queue first. So we'll go to Joseph next.
Yeah, so my question is regarding experience when it comes to financing. My assumption here is that entrepreneurs, they really need to understand cash flow. You mentioned a little bit about it. Can you also talk about maybe balance sheets and income and stuff like that? Is it important that entrepreneurs understand these things, or just hand it off to the accountants?
Well, it really depends on what level of an entrepreneur you are, right? If you are going to start a software company in the Silicon Valley, you need to know the in and outs of what it means to go raise money and equity and how you plan equity and the different rounds of funding, because you don't want to end up having 2% of a business. And you understand that for a lot of people that are going to help you do what it is that you're about to do, they don't really care about the product and your vision. They want to make money. And that's completely fine. So if you realize that reality exists and the people who want to invest in you really want to make money on 10x on their money, and they don't care if you create a software company that does X or Y, then you need to understand their world, because they're your customers for a little while, right? So I invested a lot of time learning what it means to go raise money. What do they care about? How do those financiers and VCs think? It's not rocket science. A friend of mine told me that rocket science is easy, by the way. So I always say rocket science as if I think epistemology is harder than rocket science. So I say as difficult as epistemology. Yeah, you just need, and I go back to my previous point, if you're really passionate about what you're doing and you understand that that's in your way, right? Getting the funding for the next round, you will spend nights learning it. You will have the motivation to learn it. And it's just amazing what I got to learn. I thought I'm not interested in finance, and I got very interested in finance. I thought I'm not interested in design. I got very good with design. I thought I'm not very good with, what was it? I remember that I had to learn mathematical formulas for subscription and churn management, because I was responsible for the churn rate of our company. And there's a lot of science that goes into that. And I was super motivated to learn it and to understand it, because it was contextual. I knew exactly why I need this. So even if you don't understand finance, get to the point where you need finance and then go learn the parts that you want or the part that you need. And as I said before, go hire experts you trust.
The next question is from David. Why is ruthless focus so hard? Do you have any processes for overcoming the urges to widen the focus?
Can I go with this one first?
Sure.
Yeah, so actually to echo what Tal was saying earlier, when you really value something and you have a clear goal around it, ruthless focus isn't hard. Ruthless focus is what is driven by how much you value something. And I'll give you an example. When I'm out surfing, ruthless focus is one, and the challenge is high enough. My ruthless focus out there is not hard at all. I'm completely in the zone, and I'm never more focused than I am in those moments. And it's as long as I've trained myself, and as long as I'm well nourished and all those kind of things, the physiology is taken care of, then ruthless focus isn't so hard. It's actually when I really value something enough. So when it comes to my business, when it comes to certain aspects of my clients, when it comes to surfing, when it comes to my fiance, these things, the focus in those areas is not hard. I actually find it quite easy to focus that in that way. But I think you might be wondering about managing and maintaining focus. And I just want to say a couple of things about that. There are some sort of fashionable concepts around the moment around cognitive load and cognitive residue. And I'm sure Lee might have something to say about this at some point. But there are some theories around that. You can become overloaded with too much, and you can distract yourself. There are many sort of focusing techniques. I've mentioned this in previous discussions. Like if you are writing, say I'm writing a paper and I've got to be in the zone in it, but I need to take a break. It may be a bathroom break or something like that. Then to be able to maintain my focus, never do a task in that break that is of equal or more cognitive load than what I'm actually doing, because then you'll lose all focus. So for example, if I'm writing a paper and I need a break, have a stretch and drink a glass of water. Then I can get back into focus very easily. But if I start checking my emails or my WhatsApp or my Instagram or anything like that, focus goes out the window straight away, because I can get into clashes between value, other things that I value at the same time. And just think how quickly your focus will go if a higher value is threatened in something you're doing. So I would say that ruthless focus isn't hard as long as you have your values lined up and they're very conscious and you have a decent values hierarchy, etc. But in terms of when you're in focus, why is it so hard to maintain? Well, there are limits to the amount. I remember someone in HBL writing, why is it so hard? Why can't I really focus on a deep philosophical text for like more than half an hour? And I think Harry Binswanger came back and said, what makes you think you could focus for more than half an hour on that? These things take up huge amounts of energy. So I think being aware of that is really important. And I'm wondering what you might have to say on that, Tal.
I just want to make sure, you know what, I'll give two things. One is more personal, like you talked about, Josh, and one is a little bit more organizational. So I don't know if can I share my screen, Razi? Is there a possibility to share my screen?
You should be able to now.
Okay, let's see if that works. I just want to show you how I run my life. This is a very simple tool I use called Workflowy. It's the simplest app ever. It's just a list that you can collapse. I have my lifetime goals, my strategic goals, and then my world, which is broken down to things I do. And then there are things I need to remember on the bottom of all things that I'm working on and I don't want to lose. But lifetime goals, strategic goals, and then my world are three layers that I use in order to create a consistency and alignment between what I say consciously I want to achieve, to what are my strategies to achieve them, to then my day-to-day work. And sometimes you see complete misalignment between what I'm working on and my goals. And it's like, why am I working on this? And then you take a step back and it's like, I should not be working on this. It might be something that needs to be done, but why am I spending time on it? So use simple lists. That's what I recommend in order to keep focus. And more from an organizational perspective, I would say that's much harder. Keeping focus on, for 50 people or 100 people is, it's like much harder. The trick there is to write and speak as much as possible the focus and the goals that we're focused on. We used to have weekly all hands on every Thursday, 8 to 9 a.m. And it's a mandatory meeting. And we would be very seriously preparing for like half a day on Wednesday, all of the executive team, preparing the meeting for Thursday. Because it was our weekly opportunity to take everything that is happening and to give everyone the context of why those are things that are happening in the context of what we're trying to achieve. And that was the most clarifying, I would say, procedure that we applied, allowing everybody who's doing anything in the company to understand why they're doing what they're doing and how it serves the bigger picture, and take a lot of questions and answer them, which elevates or puts on the table a lot of inconsistencies or contradictions that people don't know they have. And I can give endless amount of examples of what happened in those meetings. So if you're managing several people, a team or something, write a brief of what it is or a vision, whatever that is, depending on the scope. Say that's what we're going to achieve. Quantify it with measurable outcomes like numbers or outputs, saying that's what we're going to make $1 million by next year. Okay, so very quantifiable. I don't know if you know OKR, the objectives and key results. If you don't know that system, I recommend you read about it. OKR. It's used by Google, by Facebook, by all the leading companies. And that's what we're using in ARI, because again, I found it very beneficial to take some things that are very abstract and quantify them and have clear expectations of every department in the organization, and to see how it all aligns together. And that's your job as a leader, to always make sure that everything is going in the right direction. And if you do a good job, then you'll spend 20, 30, 40% of your energy of the organization for useless things. And if you're not careful, you will lose 90, 95% of the organization's energy for useless things. So it's a never-ending battle of focusing a large amount of people.
Next question is from Nikos.
Thanks, Razi. So, Tal, the question is, how do you transform all these principles that, not transform the principles, because I guess the principles are the same, but how do you see entrepreneurship when it comes to an organization that has as its focus not a product or not necessarily achieving maximum profit in terms of, let's say, money revenue, but in terms of having an impact on the culture? So, for example, what you do with ARI, or even smaller projects, but with the same aim. For example, what Razi is doing. So how is there any difference? Because you've been also in the tech industry, but now you find yourself in a different organization. So how do you understand entrepreneurship when it comes to fighting the battle of ideas, but also needing to, have a revenue, have a good quote product and all that stuff?
So the simplifying factor in business is money. You can quantify everything with money, and that's a very simplifying factor, because in the end of the day, there's one ultimate measure that you can measure everything by. In an organization like ARI, there is an aspect of money, but that's on the income side. On the output, it's very complicated. But I would say if you put enough thought into it, you can simplify it to the point where you define what is the leading indicator that defines success. So when I came in and I drove everybody crazy at ARI for several months, because I wouldn't stop talking about, how do you measure it? How do you measure it? It's like, what do you mean? I'm writing an article. What do you mean, how do I measure it? It's like, how do you measure the success of the article? What is a successful article versus a non-successful article? So you distill and you distill to the point where you say, okay, now I get it. What we're trying to achieve is, let's say, cultural impact or education, let's say in the case of ARI, right? How do you measure success in education? I don't know, people engaging with your content, right? Can you measure their application of the content? No, very, very hard. Are there proxy measures to people applying your... Anyway, in the end of the day, that's why I'm measuring the success of our departments. And again, I'm driving people crazy, because you're taking philosophers and now you're applying business-oriented procedures to an organization like ARI. My content team knows that on every marketing meeting, I'm starting the meeting with how many hours of consumption did we have in the last week? And then they say, oh my God, so the CEO is now measuring my success. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened with the Wi-Fi. So where was I cut off?
You were cut off when you were saying that at some point you figured it out what it means to have impact beyond, for example, the point where, okay, this has been consumed by X amount of people, but then how do you measure the impact of something that has been consumed by X amount of people? So how many have absorbed it?
Yeah. So you distill it to the point where you agree that if we measure the amount of consumption of a specific piece of content, then you're measuring as close as possible to what's happening in reality. And then even without doing anything, by just laying out the fact that you're going to measure success or failure according to that metric, you've done a lot of management, because the writers and the speakers will try to focus on products that yield more of the metric that you want to grow. but as I said, you should try to find the right proxy metrics that are mean success to you. So the process of deliberating what is the right proxy metric is a very important one, because I see a lot of companies measuring the wrong things. And those things, by the way, could be very complicated. I took a course one time that went through how companies like Facebook, I think it was the guy from Facebook who delivered that course, the fact that a guiding metric can be a complicated weighted formula of several variables. For instance, I want 0.4 of that and 0.3 of that and 0.3 of that divided by this. And everybody looks at it and it's like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense, because it balances out quality and quantity. It balances out the need to grow and the need to sustain existing customers. If we take that formula and the number goes up, then we're in a good place. So it can be that complicated, or it can be as simple as like, we want more of ARI's content being consumed on a weekly basis, or how many people are watching our webinar every week. That creates the right kind of behavior. And this is why it's so important to concretize everything. Don't live inside your head. Don't manage inside your head. It's like, I think it was great. How was that event? Awesome. It's like, what do you mean it was awesome? How many people showed up? What was the metric of the feedback? They gave us 4.2. We said that 4.5 is great. So why are you calling it great? 4.5 is okay, right? So really concretize everything and manage it. You know, we're always talking about in philosophy about the spiral, right? The oscillation between concepts and concretes, concept and concretes. It's the same way with management. You want something, you get it in reality. You want something, you get it. And by the way, it's a never-ending process of improvement, of learning more and more and getting more and more sophisticated.
Thanks.
Right. Because we only have a few minutes left, I am going to really resist the urge to ask my own follow-up here, and we'll go to Lee.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to skip my question about how I work as an entrepreneur. You can ask that another time, because I think there's some issues there. But something a little closer to my own values, I'm going to ask about. Josh, at the beginning of the session, mentioned the importance of unfettered thinking. And Tal talked about the unboundedness of good thinking. And this is a very important thing to me. And there is a concept in objectivism that's a little problematic for me in this connection. And that's the concept of the arbitrary. You know, a statement is arbitrary if there's no evidence offered for it. And that I find very useful when dealing with people who make claims, who say this is true, and then you ask them, you know, why is it true, and they have no evidence. To have a category for that is very useful. But where I have a problem is with trying to apply that, as some of the writings do, to what to think about. The idea of what to think about. My favorite line in world literature is from Atlas Shrugged, is the line, "There are no evil thoughts except one, the refusal to think." You know, that's Francisco talking to Reardon. And that's that's how I look at it. And the problem with the way that the concept of the arbitrary can be applied, and I've seen it applied this way, is the idea that you should not even think about anything unless you have specific evidence for it. You shouldn't even entertain in your own mind something. And maybe I'm a whim worshiper, but I go on that on inklings, what I call inklings. It's something I introduced in an objectivist conference 30 some years ago. Anyway, feelings about thoughts. When I have a feeling that something's worth thinking about in certain fields, I will think about it, because I know that my feelings in certain areas actually have a basis, even if I don't know what it is. So the question is what do you think? Am I a whim worshiper? Is that a bad thing to do or a good thing? I think it's essential. I don't think you can get your thinking off the ground, entrepreneurial or otherwise, if you don't pay attention to and follow up on inklings about feelings about thoughts. So that's my statement and question. Anybody want to jump in there?
I don't know, Josh, if you want to, it's a very deep question. I have thoughts about it, but.
Well, go ahead. That's it.
I'll tell you. Okay, you know, this is a sort of good sort of HBL 200 entry debate thing, but I think I think if we go right back to what I was quoting at the beginning of the talk, is, you know, Steve Jobs. I think he would call what you're calling inklings, he would call in his language intuitions, and he would go with those all the time. And that's all I can really say at the moment, Lee. Is I think that's in the context of this, is that I think Steve Jobs would go on his inklings. He talked about them a lot.
I think he would too.
And it was a very important thing to him. But I think we would, if we were to drill it down into what he's really talking about, is his positive emotional responses to things that he values in the moment when he's making very fast decisions. Something like that.
And my thoughts is that I think we're calling them instincts and intuitions, but I think they come from a very deep place. When I see something, it's like, wow, that's important. I have no idea why, but it's important. I don't know enough about it, but it's important. Then I think it's more than just an intuition. It's almost like a subconscious integration that I'm still haven't figured out what it is. But with the vast knowledge that is available to me in my subconscious is making an integration or a value judgment, lightning fast. It's like there's something about that person and what he's saying that introduces a huge opportunity, which I have no idea what it is. So, but I know I need to dive into it. So I would call that an intuition, but it comes from, and your intuitions could be very, very precise if you have a really good value judgment mechanisms back in the back of your head, and which I think was what Steve Jobs had. So I think it's more than just intuitions, you know, who knows. It's very deep integrations that happen at the subconscious level that point at potentials that might turn out to be something that is useless. But I agree with you. It's worth time to investigate them because they're representing something that is very deep in your core values and lightning fast evaluations of things that sometimes are very deep. It's, you know, the subconscious mind is doing most of the work most of the time. And it's telling you something. It's telling you something. And you should listen. You know, so yeah, I'm there with you. I don't know how to call it, inkling, hunches, intuition.
Yeah, I don't use the term intuition very, very much, if at all, because it has about a dozen different meanings.
Yeah.
Half of them are totally mystical. So I have something more specific in mind. So I like inklings for this, feelings about thoughts. But anyway, the point is that it's a very good thing to follow up on your inklings. And unfortunately, there is some objectivist literature. I'm not going to cite it because I'm not going to, but there is some that is contrary to that idea. And some, if you take that literature too seriously, you will stultify your thought processes, which you certainly wouldn't want to do.
I can say I'm out of my league when it comes to that. So my intuition tells me, be careful when a lead person asks you a question on a Q&A.
Unfortunately, that's going to be the last one because we're out of time. But, you know, I think it was in July of last year that we were originally going to have an event with Josh and Tal here in London. And that ended up not happening. And actually at the time, it didn't happen because Tal, you were supposed to be in London and you didn't travel. We didn't even think about doing this back then. So hopefully we can have you in person as well, but maybe sooner than that remotely. And one of the great advantages of this is that people can also attend from around the world. So Tal, thank you for joining us. And thank you, as always, Josh. We will be back next Saturday. We don't know exactly what we're doing yet, but we will be doing something Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. 2 weeks from today, we have Lee, who will be speaking about introspection. And yeah, oh, and also every weekday, we now have a live show on Facebook. It's 20 minutes long. you should watch it. It's very good. Nikos is one of the hosts of that show. The other hosts are Raka and Gloria Alvarez. So I recommend watching that. And if you enjoy our content, I hope you'd consider becoming a member. You can go to AynRandCenter.co.uk/membership. And yeah, as Tal said, everything is measured in money, and money helps us do more of what we would like to do. So thanks again, and see you all soon.
I just wanted to say a really quick thing.
Yeah.
We're struggling with next Saturday's topic because it's around that rather thorny subject of how we let the colonies go. And over in the UK, we're always very happy for you that there is a lot of talk that we're going to take you back one day, and maybe that will be the discussion of how you come back home. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. Have a great Independence Day.
Yeah, and those of you who want to join us on Independence Day, yeah, it will be something to do with the U.S. and celebrating what America is. So that's going to be next Saturday.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoyed it. Bye-bye.